Want to keep your dollars and cents? Then download the Sense app from the Office of Financial Readiness. That's Sense, S-E-N, money sign, E, to save for retirement, build credit, create a spending plan, or buying a home. You can't do any of those things without money. So if you have sense, you'll download the Sense app. That's S-E-N, money sign, E, today. And be sure to follow at DoD FinRed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And welcome to The Fast Take. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
And in this episode, we're going to talk about the last week's episode we did on woke and critical race theory. You didn't really get a chance to hear too much from Jack Murphy. We kind of focused on the guests that we had for the show, but I think it's important for you to hear from my partner in crime over here, Jack. You had an opportunity to listen to the podcast, man. This is your time. This is your moment to shine, brother. What do you got for us, man? What'd you think?
I thought it was a good episode. I thought that it was a totally new and different perspective than what we're hearing in the press and in the media or on social media or wherever it is we hear things nowadays. There's a lot of shouting about critical race theory. There's a lot of shouting about political correctness and all of these things, but none of them are approaching, the story that I think you guys did for the last podcast about how it was basically a theory for grad students in certain classes, and it's kind of propelled itself, or not, it's been propelled by people with an agenda into the public space, into the public sphere. And I think people on both sides of the issue have, in a sense, monetized it. They've commodified this sort of obscure academic theory, literally to make money. Like, there are these people now who are like trauma specialists, and they like sell their services to corporations and lecture people about how, if you're white, you were born bad. And that sort of stuff is part of what spurs, in addition to the right actually hyping it up like Tucker Carlson. But in addition to people kind of latching onto that and selling CRT, that's why you have this huge right-wing backlash of people freaking out. Like, you're teaching this to our kids in kindergarten? It's like, no, calm down. Like, that's not what's happening. And full disclosure, like, a lot of the ideas that are associated with that we publicly associate with CRT are things that I'm opposed to. I think are horrible. Where, concepts that like we're going to shame our children over slavery. I certainly don't disagree with like teaching history. That's important. But there's the distinction. Teaching history is not CRT. CRT is not teaching history. And I think even the academics are pretty open and honest about that. But then at the same time, what we have happening now is I've likened it to the satanic panic of the 1980s, that we're looking for these underground tunnels under the daycare center that children are smuggled out and used for, rituals and abuses and things like this. And it was total hysteria. Just those tunnels did not exist. This was mainstream. This was on Ricky Lake. This was on, daytime talk show TV at the time. And I think we're experiencing a sort of moral panic in regards to critical race theory right now, where both sides have completely hyped it just totally over the top to ridiculous levels. But when it comes to the subject of wokeness in the military, I actually have a different argument, a different discussion I'd like to bring up. That is very different than what Brian or Dr. Whitty, who are both very good on the previous episode, they had a different conversation. I think I have a bit of a different angle that I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump into that, but I want to approach that critical race theory thing that you just talked about, and I agree with you. I think what we've reached in this country is the ability to weaponize anger.
Right.
We have weaponized and monetized anger. And I think that last part, the monetization of anger, is something that is dangerous, because it relies heavily on warping, changing, disrupting a message, a viewpoint. It's based. It won't go so far as to be a lie, but it's certainly bending reality and truths, and people are buying into it. And I think the
Right.
QAnon conspiracy really showed the power of bending reality, of changing, and the power of messaging and weaponizing, monetizing anger. We saw
Yeah,
that in January 6th, which
it's a monetized ecosystem, right? And we see this with not just crazy people, quote unquote crazy people, but major corporations have done this. Nike built a whole ad campaign around Colin Kaepernick, taking a knee at the football games, which is controversial. And then the whole thing with the Betsy Ross flag, where they're saying the Betsy Ross flag is racist. We're not allowed to have that anymore. We just had July 4th. And on July 4th and the days running up to it, I mean, like, big outlets are running all these articles about like how our flag is bad, how our country is bad, how grilling on the 4th of July is bad. And it's like these companies, they know what those buttons are. They know what buttons to push to make us angry. And it's actually really disconcerting to see the biggest, most prestigious news outlets in the country, or in the biggest corporations in our country, play this game where they're acting like teenagers on 4chan. They're trolling us, but they're not teenagers on 4chan. They work at the biggest, most prestigious outlets in the country. These are people who have graduate degrees in public relations and things like this. It's a Madison Avenue approach to monetizing our anger. And think about what the long-term repercussions are of that on our society.
And the other side to that is, you know, you mentioned all these groups and media organizations, corporations that are telling you America's bad and white people are bad and shame your children for the history. But on the other side of it, you have people on the right, some folks on the right that are taking extreme measures like critical race theory. What are they teaching our children in schools? They're not teaching. They're preschoolers. That's not true.
Right.
They're not teaching that.
I've had arguments with people who tell me, they insist to me that my daughter is being taught CRT in her school. She goes to a public school in New York City. I have looked at the curriculum, and because we've been in the era of COVID and she was taking remote classes over Zoom, I have also been a party to many of these classes and overheard them. They are not teaching our kids CRT. They're not. It's just not happening.
And I think it's interesting when I hear people like, I heard my son Billy his teacher was like, white people are evil. I'm like, are you sure about that? Can we get a fact checker on that? Can we figure out, did that actually happen? Because I firmly believe that the media, whether it's Fox or CNN, I don't care who your media outlet is, they're probably warping some of the truth. In fact, folks, if you're listening to Military Matters, fact check us. Please do. But by all means. I'm telling you, I'm unbiased. I'm telling you, I'm not trying to come at you with some nonsense. But hey, if you can bust me out, bust me out. I don't think Fox and CNN are that open to being criticized. And when they are, what they do is they simply do like a little line that says, we made a mistake on that story.
Well, that's where you see the narrative start. The narrative starts changing, and then they tell you, well, it's crypto CRT, right? It's secret. It's buried beneath the surface, and they camouflage it, and it's anti-racism, or they're teaching about colonization, but it's all CRT. What they're doing is they call CRT is a code word for anything they don't like. So we're not even talking about critical race theory anymore. We're just talking about like, here are some aggrieved people and they don't think our kids should learn about XYZ. Maybe it's evolution in the schools. Maybe it's slavery. Who knows? But they're just lumping together, you know, they're maybe teaching some things I don't like in the schools, and we're just going to call that CRT. And that's the narrative. That's the discussion.
Well, you know, I had I was talking about this episode with a friend of mine, and she's an African-American, and she made a great point to me. She said, we wouldn't need to be talking about CRT and critical race theory if we just taught history in school. Just teach history as it is. You don't need to spin history. History is exactly what it was. It is what it is. You want to talk about Columbus? well, great. He did discover this new world, and he did this, and great, cool. Did something, he came into the boats, did his thing. Also, just helped destroy and enslave an entire people. That is part of history as well. People, I think this is part of our American legacy. Maybe it's just human nature. I don't know. We want to worship history. We don't want to just learn history. We want to worship it. We want heroes of history. We want to look back at history and go, George Washington was above all men. Benjamin Franklin, above all men. Columbus, a discoverer above all men. But these were still dudes. These were still men who, yes, can accomplish great things, but probably and most likely, and for some of them, definitely did horrible, horrible things. And whether or not it was okay at the time is irrelevant, because we have to look at history through the lens of today. Like, okay, back then, yes, a black person could be bought and sold. We can't look at that and go, well, it was just the time, folks. It was just no.
Yeah. Well, the
you have to look at the lens and go, okay, that's wrong.
The historical lesson to learn from that is we evolved past that, right? Like that's how it was back then, but we made changes. We improved our system of governance in this country, and you know, because that's wrong.
But there's a point now where we don't want to talk about history. We don't want to talk about slavery, because it's in the frame of people are going to. So my understanding, the way I see it, I understand people see this as, if we talk about George Washington owning slaves, we are doing a disservice to the founding father of our country. That by talking about the negative things in George Washington's life, that we are in turn defaming the country. We are besmirching the foundation of the country of, you know, freedom and liberty and justice for all. But I don't think that's true. I think you can talk about freedom, liberty, and the foundation of a beautiful country while acknowledging its shortfalls. You have to, I believe, acknowledge where we slipped up. To your point, talking about the evolution of the American dream. The American dream it started as the American dream for certain people. And it's not even just race. It was men, white landowners. They had a dream and they started making it work. The dream evolved. And today that dream is significantly different than it was in 1775 or, you know, the 1700s, 1600s. The dream of, going back to the Magna Carta, the dream of freedom at the individual level to pursue the things that make you a better person and pursue your dreams, it's evolved. So instead of like worrying about like, oh, we're going to tarnish the good name of Abraham Lincoln or the good name of George Washington, we can acknowledge there were faults, but also acknowledge the evolution of all these wonderful things that make our country amazing.
I mean, there's a lot of hyperbole involved, of course, on across the spectrum. But when I listen to, let's see, like Sean Parnell, our former Secretary of State, Pompeo, some of these sorts of folks who have made comments that we are teaching our children, in some cases, and from their point of view, we're teaching our soldiers to hate America. That we're injecting this sort of CRT ideology that's teaching them to hate their country. And you can't be a service member, you can't be a soldier and also hate your country. I wrote something about this, talking about like, for instance, Reality Winner was somebody who came out in indictments. She said that she does hate her country. There are other examples as well, but I think that question is interesting. Where are those lines? For instance, I'm someone who I criticize my country. I've broken news stories that are deeply critical of the United States military. I don't hate my country. I don't hate America. I just want us to be better. I'm not going over to the other side here, So I think like, I wish that's not what I read about Jack Murphy. That's not what you've heard.
That's not what I read about you, buddy.
In the halls of the military. but I wish that was the conversation that we could have. Is how does one be critical of their country or be critical of the military, but not hate their country? What is the difference between those things? How do you be a patriot, but not a mindless, idiotic patriot without being a drone, right? How do you be a thinking human being participating in a democracy that's critical of your state and local and federal government without, like I said, going over to the other side, so to speak?
And I think that's the problem, especially today in how highly polarized everything is. I think Americans are getting patriotism and nationalism very confused. They're getting it extremely confused. They're beginning to think that nationalism is the good one and patriotism falls under nationalism. And that's that's just not true.
It depends how you define nationalism. And I don't know what definition you're using, but I mean, nationalism is critical to maintain, I know someone's going to jump at me and say, this sounds like I'm talking like a fascist.
Oh boy, here we go.
You need nationalism to maintain some level of cohesion in a country. I mean, we're not, or I hope we're not just a group of tribes that are all at each other's throats all the time, which is what some people fear we're devolving into. But you need some sort of cohesion. You need like for instance, the U.S. Constitution is a sort of nationalistic document that binds us all together. A country that doesn't have any nationalism is they're going to have a difficult time mobilizing or doing anything of significance because they're so internally divided.
So I literally just now, I want to thank you because you people just heard my keyboards clicking, and I wanted to touch on this. I just did what so many people do with woke and critical race theory. I had my own perception of what it was without actually looking up the definition. And to your point, nationalism is defined as the identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations.
So
I've always thought of
the bad type of nationalism is ethno-nationalism or white nationalism. Right. Sort of like, it's nationalism for one group of people, that all the black people are going to live over in this place and all the white people are going to live in this place. It's a ridiculous fantasy. But there are people who believe stuff like that.
I worry about the nationalism that comes from the worship of the state, the pedestal, putting your country in this position where it can never be wrong, and anything that at all calls into question or criticizes this nation makes you a traitor and a treasonous person. Anything that comes out of the state is
the irony there is quite right, because all of these Fox News pundits are criticizing our government, and they're saying that our government is hopelessly corrupt and infiltrated by deep state liberal traitors, right? So it's like, which is it, guys?
100%. Yeah, I've always appreciated the term patriotism. To me, a patriot is somebody who loves their country, but acknowledges it's not perfect and that we're trying to make it better all the time. But I mean, it terminology. It's so funny. It goes back to this phrase I've loved in the past. Hey man, words mean things, and they do. Nationalism, patriotism. Yeah, I didn't think about it this way, but you're 100% right. Let's jump into woke. I don't want to eat up too much of your time. Jack, you said you have a different approach to woke. Take us through it.
Right. So here's my problem with wokeness or political correctness or whatever buzzword we want to use within the military and more specific, more broadly speaking, in the United States government. When I say this, I mean the institutions of government kind of co-opting wokeness. I'm not really talking about any individual or even group of service members out there who are saying, hey, like we're our group is marginalized, we're not being treated fairly, whether they're women who have faced sexual harassment or sexual assault, or African American or other minority soldiers who are saying there's racism in the military, we should do something to fix this. Like, that's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the institutions themselves using wokeness as a shield. And I'll get a little bit more specific about what I'm talking about. Now, in the past, I think most people here are probably familiar that there's a such thing as propaganda, and there's war propaganda is used to galvanize the public to support wars. There are all sorts of different instances of this. One of the more famous, of course, is the Kuwaiti incubator baby story, which was not true at all. But there's the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter gave testimony that the Iraqi soldiers pulled Kuwaiti babies out of incubators so that they would die. This was not true. It was war propaganda to get the American people to support the war going into Desert Storm. There are all sorts of different types of war propaganda. Some of it is jingoistic. It uses like that ethno-nationalist or racist sentiments that we dehumanize the enemy. We use these sorts of jingoistic ethno-nationalist type verbiage and vocabulary to galvanize the public towards war. That's not so much in vogue anymore, right? Because our population is sensitive towards racism for a lot of good reasons, domestically, internally to America. Like, that's not really a good thing. That's not really the direction we want to go in. But there is a new type of propaganda that I notice the Pentagon and other institutions of government using, and it's wokeness, that they use it as a sort of a shield. We see the Pentagon, the CIA, and other institutions co-opting woke narratives, and it's sort of used in like official publications and things where they're really flaunting the LGBT community and the rainbow flag, other forms of marginalized groups that they're sort of celebrating publicly, which on one hand, I mean, I understand a lot of people cheer that and they think it's a great thing. And they're like, hey, our institutions are becoming more open. We're becoming more open to even the transsexual issue, that we have transsexual service members and they have their own unique issues, frankly, medical issues that they deal with. And so there is something to celebrate there, but I have a fear, and I guess history will show whether or not my fear is irrational, or maybe I'm having some sort of reactionary opinion to this because I'm a white guy, right? Some people will probably say that's what's going on, but I know in the past, war has hid behind the American flag. The propaganda has hid behind our flag. I fear that war in the future is going to hide behind a rainbow flag, that our wars of the future are going to be justified, that we need to go to war for the LGBT community, that we need to liberate the gay community in Iran, that we need to liberate women in Iran, or wherever else in the world. We've seen this narrative very clearly come to the forefront in Afghanistan, especially in recent weeks as we're pulling out of Afghanistan, that we need to stay there for women's rights. And I challenged people on social media. I said, can you show me any document anywhere that says that we were in Afghanistan to secure women's rights? And the best I could find was actually a fireside chat given by Laura Bush when we first invaded, that we were going to war in part to secure the dignity of the Afghan women. Now, that's not exactly a policy right there, but that's where this whole myth kind of originated from. And we see this also with the CIA. The CIA has put out these very woke ads celebrating diversity, that we have these diverse staff, that we have women, people of color, people who I believe in this one ad I'm referencing, she talks about how she suffers from anxiety. She has mental health issues. And again, on one hand, internally, we can sort of celebrate this, that we welcome anybody into these institutions. America is a melting pot and anyone can come and be a part of it. And anyone who served in the military knows our service members come from all over the place. They're all sorts of different people. But again, my concern is with the institutions of government themselves adopting these narratives and using them as an outward-facing public narrative The reality of war is that it's an ugly thing. It's very ugly. What the CIA does at its heart, human intelligence, is an ugly thing in many regards. I just read a book, I finished it yesterday, called The Widow Spy. In 1977, we recruited in 75, we recruited this asset. He was in Moscow, and we ran him as hard as we could to produce classified Soviet documents. And his mental state drastically deteriorated because of the stress. And he was caught by the KGB, and he bit down on a suicide pill that the CIA provided him. And he chose his own way out. Now, I'm not saying the CIA was wrong to do that. I'm saying they acted exactly the way we expect them to gather strategic intelligence for our country and keep our country safe. Our military, fighting in Okinawa and Guadalcanal and charging the cliffs at Point du Hoc on D-Day, our military did nothing wrong. They were defending democracy, but war was fucking ugly. It was a really ugly thing. And a lot of American soldiers died. A lot of civilians died in the crossfire of these wars. And a lot of enemy soldiers died as well. You say what you want of them, but I mean, it's a horrible human toll that war takes, and it devastated the world. And so when I see these institutions of government using wokeness as their public outward facing narrative, it sends a chill up my spine. It scares me because I can see that the new propaganda that our government uses is drastically changing. And it really is the iron fist wrapped inside the velvet glove. And it really bothers me.
I have always been skeptical when I see entities placating to certain groups. And to your point, when I see stuff like we're LGBTQ friendly and we want you to have anxiety and stuff like that, I'm like, is there legit change here that's happening? Is there a legit acceptance, or are you doing
PR?
What's popular? Are you yeah, is this a PR campaign? This is exactly why I think we are susceptible to the anger campaigns, because we've been lied to so many times. I mean, we can go back to the civil rights movement. 1964. On paper, everyone's equal. But how long did it take before it actually, before real changes occurred?
That was what my point there is, that I don't think we're going to go to war in Iran to liberate the women. Like, I'm saying that's a public relations narrative that could be sold to people. Just like in Afghanistan, we weren't there to liberate women. We were there for geopolitical reasons. So there's something really dark happening, but the messaging that is sold to the public is progressive politics, and that it makes it look like war is something very progressive. And that's just something that horrifies me. Because when war really happens and it kicks off, especially if another big one kicks off, it's not going to be progressive. It won't be. You're going to see tens of thousands of soldiers die in a flash. And I think that the people who advocate this and try to force this into our institutions on the ground level, the sort of rank and file, I would advance to them, I would argue to them, they need to find a better vehicle for their personal politics. That the military and the CIA and other defense institutions like this, they can never be the vehicles for progressive politics the way they think they can, because what they do is just inherently has a darkness around it, an ugliness around it, that it can't be what they want it to be.
Well, doesn't this go back to, I asked, I'm going to try and pull this up really fast if I can, but I asked Brian and I asked the professor, John Whitty, about a quote from, and I'm trying to extend the sentence out so I can actually pull this up. When I was doing some of the research here, I found this quote from, here it is. It is actually from 1948, and it is a quote from former Secretary of War, Royal, And he said the army, he contended, must follow the nation, not lead it. In social matters, the army must not experiment when, quote, without prejudice to the national defense. The army could reduce segregation at the platoon level if it would do so, but at all such steps should be taken one at a time. This was an argument he made about integration. At the time, the generals were saying, hey, Secretary of War, yes, we could integrate the military. But if we do, we have a lot of whites and some blacks that are going to clash. It's going to compromise the integrity of the United States military force. We will not be a unified war-fighting force. Our enemies will take advantage of it. They'll come to war. They will segregate. They'll separate us. They'll make us hate each other. We won't be able to cooperate, and we'll lose wars. His argument here is that we should, of course, not lead social matters, but the army should follow them, and that we can't experiment with progressive ideas. Now, if we were in 1948, that would have some legs. That argument might sound viable. Like, okay, that's true. We're living in everything's segregated. Let's not joke and kid ourselves here. There are some whites in this army that are going to dislike those blacks, and there are some blacks that will dislike those whites. If we integrate, we could compromise the entire warfighter force. Now, let's not do it. Let's take this much slower. It was an executive decision that forced the hand of the military that made this happen. So, in retrospect, we made the right call. We integrated. Enemies didn't come out of the woodwork to kill us, and we figured it out. And it comes back down to that, like when we're discussing the woke episode, all or nothing. I don't believe this is an all or nothing discussion where it's like we have to accept all aspects of this particular thing, whether like transgender. That means we're going to bring them in, recruit them, specifically recruit transgender people. And if you're transgender, do you want a gender reassignment surgery? We'll pay for it. We'll pay for your counseling. We'll just come on in, people, and whatever, and open the floodgates to all people, whatever you want to do. And we'll even change standards. We'll do this, we'll do that. I don't believe that's the discussion. I believe it's a discussion of let's accept people. Here's the standard that you have to meet. We don't change the standards, but we allow more people to come in. I think that we can have those discussions about the individual pieces of those issues. But I guess my question to you, Jack, is does the DOD accept a policy of leading the nation in progressive social ideas, or does it just follow along with the country?
Well, I'm skeptical that the military...
Are we asking the wrong question? I was going to say, or am I asking the wrong question? Go ahead.
Well, I'm skeptical that the military can ever lead the country in progressive ideas, because the military, I mean, let's be honest, like broad swaths of the military are still locked up in this sort of like post-war 1950s mentality. I mean, it's still sort of the idea where the wives support the husbands, and they have their little clubs on the post, and they go to tea parties or whatever they do. I mean, the military is sort of in a time capsule, and it's in an alternative universe in so many ways. I'm not like at all convinced that the military can lead the way in like progressive politics. And I think using the military as a standard bearer or like the flag waver of like, they're leading the way with our progressive politics. I think that's wrong. And I don't think it's realistic, and I don't think it's honest. I think our civilian population and civilian leadership needs to lead the way on that. And look, just think about it on the broadly speaking. I mean, you're asking a massive institution of war to lead the way in your progressive politics. Like, it doesn't really make sense. Isn't it the responsibility of the artists and the avant-gardes and the counterculture people on the outside to lead the way on new ideas? Isn't that their part, the activists and the protesters and so forth? It's their part to lead the way on progressive politics. So I think, again, that when we do this, we're asking the military to be something that it can never actually be. And even what I'm asking the military to do is probably something it will never do. I'm asking it to be honest about war and what it does and what those conflicts produce. Stop hiding behind some sort of progressive politics and come forward and be honest and candid with the American public about what it is that you do and why you exist. Because I think the public needs to understand the cause and effect. They need to understand the consequences of war. And as we've seen the last 20 years, John Q. Public is pretty oblivious to those costs.
I don't think the public understands what hell. I'm not even gonna say the public, man. Look, I was teaching at 35 Mike School back in 2009, 2010. And I remember I asked a young soldier, about 19 years old, just finished basic training. I said, why did we go to war in Iraq? Like, what do you think? What happened? Give me the story. He gave me the historicals. And he said, well, Sergeant, Saddam Hussein paid Osama bin Laden millions of dollars to crash an airplane into a building. And then they found out that they were moving bombs and guns and an ambulance or something. And didn't they ship like a nuclear bomb or something like to Afghanistan? I think. And I'm sitting there like, what? Okay, so this is a young man, 19 years old. The question before that was, why did you join the military? He said, I wanted to fight for my country. This young man signed up to fight for his country in a war he has no idea what it's about. He signed up to go lay his life down on the line for a war he does not have any idea what it's freaking about. Mm-hmm. So when I say, well, maybe the public doesn't understand war. No, nobody. It just like even some of our own war fighters, people in uniform don't know what the hell they're in Afghanistan for. Why are we in Iraq? We've got troops now in Syria, and they're probably wondering, like, what are we doing here again? What?
It's it's really important to keep in mind that the conversations we have are elite conversations in so many ways. Even the content of a podcast like this and the people who listen to it, think about it. I mean, most of them are people deeply invested in the military in various ways. They're veterans, they're active duty, they're National Guard. The conversations I have with people, however those conversations take place, you look at just like the people I talk to on Twitter, for instance, they are career officers and journalists who have spent their entire careers covering war. So these are very elite conversations in the sense that they take place amongst like a cloistered sort of atmosphere or environment of people who are invested in the war in different ways. You got to go out and talk to normal people, just walk in the streets and just ask them about Afghanistan. They can't point to Afghanistan on a map. I'm telling you right now. And they probably don't even know that we have troops there or did up until last week.
We're living in a country where people wanted to book tickets for their vacation in the country of Wakanda.
Yeah.
That's the world we live in. Wakanda is more of a real nation to some Americans than Iraq or Afghanistan.
Remember the one where they asked people if they would support bombing Agrabah, the fictional country from Aladdin? And like 70% of people were like, hell yeah, let's bomb the shit out of them.
Let's bomb the shit out of them. It's oil, baby. Oil and genies. That's what it's about. I mean, that's the point of the Fast Take, folks. This is just, a candid discussion between myself and Jack Murphy. Jack, thanks for being patient with me on this episode. Real quick, folks, this episode about woke took me this is probably the longest episode it took for me to do the research on and find the right people to talk to, because I was super hesitant about even talking about this. I think Jack and I had several discussions about how to approach this topic, whether I wanted to approach this topic. And I really hope you all got something out of this. I'm trying my very best, especially some of the criticism I received about QAnon. I know some of you guys feel like I went after folks on the right because of my stance on QAnon. And I do not believe in my heart that QAnon has anything to do with folks on the right. I really don't. I don't think it has anything to do with conservatives. I think QAnon folks are QAnon folks. They're just a different breed of mindset. It's just a different out there. I have very strong conservative-minded friends who look at QAnon and go, that's ridiculous. No freaking way. Like, I have my own reasons to dislike the left. I don't need
including like
satanic cabals to help me do that.
I mean, there are hardcore Trump supporters who think QAnon is crazy. I mean, I know plenty of them.
Exactly. And you know, that's what I wanted to address is, you know, when I tell folks that I work with Stars and Stripes, one of the initial reactions I usually get is, oh, like, I'm not, and they're like, oh, I'm like, why? What's wrong with Stars and Stripes? You know, it's all military, go get them. It's fluffy, and it's they're controlled by the Pentagon, and they're going to say whatever the military tells them to say. And I'm like, have you obviously, first of all, we've got Jack Murphy on this podcast. So I know Jack has made millions off of being the voice box for the DOD and the man.
The Illuminati.
I mean, the Illuminati, I can see him in his $50 million mansion right now via Zoom. I could tell you right now, Jack Murphy and I have made zero friends in the DOD for some of the stories we've covered. I mean, Vanessa Guillen, I mean, we were very open about and very critical of the Fort Hood report and a lot of other stuff. Does that make us woke? Maybe. In the absolute definition of being aware of social injustice, sure. I think that what happened to Vanessa Guillen was a complete travesty. I think spending money on brand new, gee whiz, that's cool, World War II, let's think about Captain America, you know, style nonsense, spending millions of dollars on brand new World War II uniforms instead of properly funding the Criminal Investigations Division at Fort Hood is criminal in itself. That is an injustice inside the military. Does that mean I think the military is bad? Does that make Jack and I haters of the country? No, we both love this country. Hell, I served at Fort Hood. If I can make that place just a little bit better by putting the spotlight on the right people, then mission accomplished as far as I'm concerned. I don't really care if some installation commander hates me for it, but that's what we're trying to do. So woke folks, critical race theory, don't buy into the hate, don't buy into the anger, do your own research. And, you know, there's a lot of folks out there that are putting their own spin on critical race theory. They're putting their own spin on woke. They're writing papers that look academic. There are even some academic papers being written about critical race theory, why white people are the problem. Listen, that is an opinion.
Yeah, and just like I said, most people out on the street can't identify Afghanistan on a map. They don't know what the hell critical race theory is either. Like, that's also a form of like a strange conversation that takes place on social media or on Fox News. But like, if I go walking around Brooklyn and ask anybody, I can even ask African Americans or other minorities. Most people have no idea what the hell critical race theory is.
No, they don't. I had to explain it to some folks or like show them an article or something. But there is some hinky stuff out there. But look, take it from the person who actually developed the theory itself. One, it's just a theory. Two, it shouldn't be taught to anybody unless you're at the graduate level. And even then, it's just a discussion topic. So don't let the left or the right scare you with the boogeyman in the closet who's out to come and take your guns and take away your gay rights and take away your freedom. Tell them to F off. Stick to the middle. Stick to some rational thought. Give some things some you know what? Instead of critical race theory, how about some critical thought theory? How about you just give things some critical thought
and understand these pundits who are trying to make you angry all the time. They've monetized your hatred and anger, and they're making money off of emotionally activating you every day.
Every time you leave a comment under a Tucker Carlson video, a puppy dies somewhere. Just remember that. A puppy dies every time you leave a comment under a Tucker Carlson video. All right, folks, that does it for me and Jack. You can find us, of course, at stripes.com. Use promo code podcast, save 50% off your digital subscription. You can follow us on Twitter. We are at StripesMMPod. StripesMMPod. Make sure you go down there, give us a like, give us a follow, give us a subscribe, and please, for speaking of dead puppies, every time you don't share this episode, a puppy does die. I'm just kidding. But really, we do need the support. Share, like, listen, subscribe, and share this podcast. We are here for you. And as always, you can you can email me. You can email us directly at militarymatters@stripes.com. I want to hear your feedback. Be on the lookout. There's a phone number I put out often. In fact, if you give me a second, I've been putting out this phone number for you guys to be able to give us a call, leave us a voicemail. This is a chance for you to kind of drop some tips out there. If you think you've got an interesting story, if you have something you want to address with the public, if you want us to go hunt something down, go down a rabbit hole, you can reach us at 202-658-7557. I say again, 202-658-7557. Leave us a voicemail. Don't leave us any hate mail though, because I mean I've got plenty of that. I've got that for days. But that's it, folks. You can also follow Jack Murphy at Jack Murphy RGR. He also has a really kick-ass podcast. What is that? Team House podcast.
Team House. Yeah, you can find it on
the
YouTube.
Team House.
We do the show live every Friday at 8 p.m.
Boom. Look at that. I mean, we're dropping some plugs for Jack Murphy's show, but before you listen to his, make sure you listen to this one because, I mean, his is already pretty popular.
Our show is our show is more live interviews with people from special operations and the intelligence community for the most part.
There you go, folks. Go get your special operations fix. I know you want it. You can follow me on Twitter at RodPodRod. And I really don't have another podcast that I'm doing right now. I kind of put the After Action Review podcast on the back burner right now, but we'll see how that goes. All right, folks, that's it for us. We will see you at the next episode. Wait, before we go, quick teaser. Next episode, the Red Scare, right? Are we waking the dragon?
Yes, I got a 3-part series coming at you guys. Since we're withdrawing from Afghanistan and that war is coming to a conclusion, I think it was really important to talk about the rise of China and the national security implications of that. So it's a 3-part series. It's going to deal. The first one is the geopolitics around China and the history of China and the national security threats emanating from China. The second episode focuses all on Chinese espionage. And then the third one is about what would happen if America and China came to an actual shooting war.
And I'm trying to do a 4th episode on maybe like what ifs. I think that'd be kind of cool. We should do like a what if Joe Biden fought the chairman of the Communist Committee. Let's just get silly with it, episode 4. But no, guys, we got some really cool stuff. China. Listen, if you think we're going to spend the next 20 years fighting insurgents in the middle of deserts and terror like that, I think that we're we'll still be doing that, but that's not going to be the focus in the next 20 years.
Right.
We're looking at force on force, near peer global power competitors. This is going to be an ugly war if we do this again. And let's hope that China,
it won't be a woke war.
Do not. It won't be you'll be awake, because the flash of global weapons taking off are definitely going to pull you out of your bed. But let's hope it doesn't get to that. I'm personally hoping that before we go to war with China, aliens show up, start blasting off. Now it's us, the Chinese and the Russians fighting aliens, independent style. Someone wake up Will Smith. We're going to need him. Folks, that's the show. I'm Rod Rodriguez. That was Jack Murphy. We'll catch you at the next episode. Are you a military spouse? MilSpouse Money Mission educates and empowers those whom service members rely on most. So if you're the household 6, captain of the homestead, leader of the domicile, check out MilSpouse Money Mission from the Office of Financial Readiness. Also, they have an app, Sense app, SEN money sign E, to save for retirement, build credit, create a spending plan, or buying a home. If the last year taught us anything, it was how important it is to save for a rainy day or a COVID year. So if you have any sense, you'll download the Sense app. That's SEN money sign E today. And be sure to follow at DoD FinRed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.